I wish I felt better equipped to experience fulfilling, intimate times of prayer with God. If that sounds like something you've experienced, then this episode is for you. Today, we're talking about some of the most common obstacles in our prayer life, why it's important to invest in that prayer life, and some practical steps to accomplish it. We're joined by clinical counselor and spiritual director Nader Sayuni, who's going to help us take really strong next steps in meeting with Jesus after graduation. Welcome to After 4, your podcast for navigating life after graduation. I'm your host and guide, John Steele, and this one's for you, alumni. Nader, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes. For those who are just joining us for the first time in this conversation, Nader and I already got to have a conversation talking about discernment, talking about life and faith rhythms, kind of bigger picture, and how do we develop those well in our life after graduation. Today, we're going to zoom in a little bit more and look at prayer in particular and some of the obstacles that come up there. Nader, before we jump in, though, you gave us a much more in-depth introduction, but can you give us just the 2-sentence intro, and then people can go back and listen to our previous conversation to get to know you a little bit more?
I think relevant to today's discussion, I am a spiritual director. I have been doing spiritual direction for over 20 years. Well, maybe not over 20, somewhere around there.
In the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood. I'm a therapist, and my area of research for my doctor of ministry in spiritual formation was about mentoring people in prayer, specifically people in their 20s.
Okay, nice. So you have some very direct experience with today's topic and the group of people who will be listening into today's topic. Yes. That's perfect. That's really perfect. And Nader, I can say, so as we talk about prayer, and we talk about obstacles to prayer and leaning into this rhythm, I would say probably even when we're at our best with our, quote unquote best, where we feel like, okay, I'm hitting my stride with my faith rhythms. They're consistent. I feel like I've got a sense of how to do these and where I'm meeting the Lord in these. I'm gonna take a guess that prayer is one of those that even at our quote-unquote best, we feel maybe some level of inadequacy or confusion or just distraction. That's the one for me, is distraction. Is just that all the other parts of my day.
That's one of the top 3.
Yeah, that's just one of the things that I'm like, okay, Lord, I really want to engage with you here, but I am so distracted by this thing that I got to do at work today. By this task that I've got to get done, or this thing that my friend said to me yesterday that I just can't stop thinking about because I'm not sure if it was a dig or if it was a joke or what. Yeah. And so I'm really glad that you're going to join us to talk about some obstacles and some helpful tools for overcoming those obstacles, or at least being able to, when we encounter them, to have some tools to get over that hump a little bit better. So, So as we think about obstacles, I've named a couple of them here, but I wonder, Nader, are there some that come up for you as you're engaging with people that are some of the most consistent or the most challenging that people come across?
Yeah, well, first, let me just say I'm happy to talk through some of these from a more personal perspective. If as we discuss it, you want to bring up your personal experience with it, just let me know, and I'm happy to. If you don't mind doing spiritual direction with that, I don't know how many people are listening.
On the spot, spiritual direction with John and Nader. All right, here we go.
The question you're asking about the common obstacles, that's kind of where I ended up distilling my research after the mentoring of these people in their 20s. I had done interviews before, interviews after. I had them fill out kind of weekly journal entries that they would turn in, and then analyzing all of those comments and then looking for themes. I came up with 3 obstacles that needed to be overcome. One of them is exactly the one that you specified, is distraction. There wasn't a single person that I talked to that didn't have a problem with distraction. Wow. And there are answers. It's not that there aren't answers. There are answers, and we'll talk through those.
Perfect.
And then the other 2 are also things that were ubiquitous. They were everywhere. One was a sense of obligation and a sense that I have to do this, and a sense of like personal pressure, like this is a job that I have to get done. And that is not where we need to be. That's an obstacle. We need to make a transition from task and obligation to a sense of invitation and a sense of relationship and connection. The second one is, or I should say the third one, because we already mentioned distraction.
Sure.
The second one is, like I said, obligation and task to invitation and relationship. And the third one is ubiquitous as well. It's everywhere. It's from guilt and shame to grace and freedom. People are so stuck. And I bet you right now, as people are listening and thinking about prayer, they are starting to feel some guilt and some shame. In fact, when I teach about this, I have this thing where I say, okay, we're going to pretend that we have a guilt and shame meter. And, I want you to notice your guilt and shame meter on a scale of 1 to 10. How many are above 5? And just about everybody raises their hand. So you're not alone.
Okay. Yeah. I imagine for some of us, a 5 is almost like our baseline for guilt and shame. That's just like, and I wake up in the morning, nothing's even happened to me yet. And I'm just like, I'm at a 5 for guilt and shame, especially when we think about spiritual rhythms and like, I really want to lean into prayer, but gosh, I just feel like I just suck at it all the time. And that can be really hard to know how to keep leaning in.
It is definitely something that a lot of people struggle with. And hopefully we'll be able to share some answers here today. That'll help people get out of that.
That's really great. Nader, which one of these do you want to start with? I would love it if we can, my guess is that we could probably lean in for an entire conversation on just one of these obstacles. I'll bet there's enough learning and experience that you've done. But if we can try to hit all three of them, I think that would be a real great benefit to our listeners. So where do you want to start with the list of 3 that you gave to us?
Yeah. So why don't we start with the obligation and task?
Okay, great.
Because that's kind of where we start, is a sense of invitation into prayer and a sense of relationship. First, I want to start by saying, very often I hear this statement that people say, prayer and reading my Bible is like going to the gym. It's a discipline that I have to do. It's something I don't feel like doing, but I make myself do it. I know it's good for me. And later I usually feel better. And I'm happy I did it.
You're talking to someone who's used that exact analogy.
You used that analogy. And my own son used it one time. And I was like, oh my gosh, was I a terrible father?
Oh, no.
and I was like, no. Let me tell you why. This is an anecdote I usually use. So if you're married and you say to your spouse, honey, having dinner with you every day is like going to the gym. I don't always feel like doing it, but I push myself to do it. I don't always like it, but afterwards I feel really good and I know it's good for me. I'm like, yeah. And then of course, there are chuckles through the audience and people are laughing. Well, you're laughing now, obviously, right? This is not going to fly in a marriage.
Yeah.
Right. And our relationship with God is a relationship of love and connection and intimacy and joy. And if it's not that, something's off.
Yeah.
If it's not that, there's something that needs to be tweaked, something that needs to be fixed. There is a set of expectations that we tend to have around prayer. And the problem with that is that prayer changes. Somebody who's been praying for a few days is in a very different place than somebody who's been praying for 20 years.
Wow.
And so as God leads us through these changes, he will kind of lift his hand of grace from a particular set of practices and we start feeling, oh, that doesn't work. Well, it's not because I screwed up. It's not because I have to try harder. It's because God is actually maybe inviting me to something better. Yeah. Maybe I've grown up a little bit. Maybe he has something a little bit more life-giving for me than what I've been experiencing. And so these different ways to pray are going to come about most often when we start to feel like, hey, what I'm doing is not working. And so we can start to look at, okay, God, where are you inviting me next? And that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a saying that the best way to pray is the way that works for you.
That's I really like that, and even just that sense of like, well, what if the difficulty that I'm experiencing in prayer is not just a roadblock? It's not just like, oh, I'm just really struggling. What if it is an invitation to God saying, like, actually, your life has changed, and I have a better way that is more life-giving for this season of life that I'd love for you to try out with me. And that's so like. Right, my season of life right now, I have I'm married, have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, and so our life is very loud. It is it's loud and go 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 all the time right now. Even if we're just at home, it's like there's constant movement and activity. And what has been surprising to me is the place where, honestly, some of my best experiences in prayer are the times where I am just sitting on my couch very comfortably and very quietly. And I am just like, I'm feeling the sunshine come through the window on my face. I'm enjoying a cup of coffee, and I'm just sitting there and saying, like, God, what do you want to do? And then, and I don't bring my list with me, and I just sit there quietly, and sometimes not a word is exchanged. But it is just a silent moment. And to me, like that me from even 5 years ago probably would have said, like, well, that's not like, well, then that's not prayer. I don't know. But like those have been some very life-giving moments, just sitting in silence and feeling like I am meeting God in a powerful way here that I wouldn't if I was sitting at the table with my Bible open and trying to do some forceful Acts prayer rhythm or something right now.
Yeah. I mean, I had a friend who struggled so much with legalism around prayer that she would just really, really have a hard time connecting with God. At one point, she felt like such a legalistic thing. She was like, had this burden that she should just like have a quiet time, that she finally sat down, had a quiet time, and then looked up to God and said, "There, you happy? I did it."
Oh gosh. Yeah. Oh my goodness. That is,
And the answer for her was exactly what you experienced. Eventually, somebody suggested, hey, why don't you spend 10 to 20 minutes in silence? And that was so transformational for her. That totally changed the game.
Wow.
So the question of, is it something that's life-giving is really key. Once again, think about the marriage analogy and think about having dinner with your spouse. Maybe there are a couple of days where you've had a bad day, or maybe you're mad at your spouse, or, you're just feeling exhausted, where you don't feel like having dinner with them. You'd rather watch Netflix while you're eating dinner. That will happen, and that's okay. And it's okay to press through that and to say, no, I'm going to make it intentional today and spend time with my wife. However, if that persists for like a week or two, I think most of us would say, my marriage needs a little bit of work and it needs a little bit of attention. I need to do something. I may read a book, I may listen to a podcast, I may go talk to my pastor, I may go see a marriage therapist, whatever it is, I need to do something. And it's the same thing with prayer, right? If things are starting to go off the rails, we don't just kind of try to grin and bear it, we do that for 2 or 3 days, maybe a week. But beyond that, if we're not looking forward to our time with God, we need to talk to somebody, do something.
Yeah. So I'm going to use that, Nader, then as a transition point, because I would imagine, as you talk about guilt and shame being another obstacle, it feels like those two things right there, what you just talked about, could be something that leads us into feelings of guilt and shame. And there's probably other places as well. But even like having an unclarified understanding of why a prayer rhythm is difficult, or why it's time to transition to a different way of engaging with prayer, that might lead to guilt and shame. So what is the What's the help that you can provide for us as we think about making that transition from guilt and shame into grace and freedom, I think is what you mentioned.
Yeah, the important thing to realize about guilt and shame is that's not what God wants you to feel. That is not where God wants you, and it's not helpful. So knowing that may not get rid of the guilt and shame, but it's a step forward. So the first thing to know is that shame is a demotivator. Research shows that shame is actually going to engage your parasympathetic nervous system. That's like putting the brakes, on your motivation, putting the brakes on your brain. It's what calms you down from the fight or flight reflex, right? Shame will engage the parasympathetic reflex. You have this kind of desire to curl up and hide. And it's not going to be something that's going to spur you to action. Now, guilt is the opposite. Guilt will motivate you to do something, but it's not what God wants. God is not motivating you through guilt, right? So that's one thing to be aware of. And then you mentioned the question of why some things are not working. A lot of times, people have triggers from their childhood that start showing up in their prayer life. If somebody grew up in a family where when there was disapproval, they got the cold shoulder. If they have a quiet time where they don't sense God's presence, God is mad at me,
Wow.
And they don't necessarily maybe think that, but they feel that. And that can play a part in that. And it's important to start knowing kind of our internal geography. Teresa of Avila says that the beginning of spiritual growth is self-knowledge. We start to know our internal geography, like, I'm being triggered because X, Y, Z. And it's really not God doing this. It's just my brain is doing this. So it's important to start knowing some of those things. Another pattern that I see a lot, especially in InterVarsity, is this idea of performing for approval. A lot of us grow up in families where, performance was highly praised. When we did something great, everybody clapped. We did well artistically, academically, athletically, you name it. We got tons of kudos. And so we start to make this association that we get love when we perform. And so we start wanting to perform for God. So it's like something. One of the things I run into in IV is people sit down to have a quiet time. It's like they want to impress God. Or like they're sitting down to take a midterm.
Right.
If they don't get an A, oh my God, God is not with me. I'm failing. I'm a terrible Christian. Instead, and I have to give credit to another IV staff member for this. It's like, why don't we let God wash our feet?
Oh, wow.
When we come to our quiet time, can we do that? Can we just let him care for us? And if something is not working, try something else. And if we don't know what else to try, we could ask God and say, "Hey, God, what are some ideas? What do you think?"
Oh man, yes.
And then another IV staff member recommended this. Matt Rogers from I think Ohio. He's like, what I tell folks is consistency and flexibility are key. We need to consistently try, and we need to be flexible. So those are, I think, both key variables. The other thing that I think we miss a lot is that we pray by the grace that is given us. And often we need to just ask God for more grace to pray. I feel like if I feel like God is asking me to pray, half an hour a day, and I'm only praying 15 minutes, and I feel like, that sounds like incredible drudgery to sit for half an hour. I'll just ask God to pray for grace to pray 5 minutes more, because it's important to grow incrementally, do it a little bit at a time. And so if I'm at 15 minutes and I feel like that's all I can do with any kind of life-giving sense about it, and God says, what do you think about, joining me for half an hour? And then I'll say, oh my God, that sounds like, it's going to be so incredibly boring. So then, at that point, I'll say, okay, God, I want to do it. Or if I don't want to do it, I'll say, God, help me to want to do it. Because it seems like you want me to do that. Can you give me the grace to want to do it? And then can you give me the grace to do 5 minutes more? Until I get to what I sense his invitation is.
Yes.
You know.
Yes. Nader, this feels to me like a place where some of our previous conversation again comes into play of some of the practices of examine. Like, where are the places for me to recognize, rather than just interpreting, this isn't working, I'm doing something wrong, so just forget the whole practice. To say, like, okay, Lord, what's happening in, like, what is making this challenging for me? Why do I feel the things that I feel? Can you, like, and here are the places in the past where I felt like very engaged with you in prayer and some of these rhythms together. Like, what should I do next? Like you said, for just inviting God in and saying, what should I try? That feels like an application of that examine process that we talked about in our last conversation.
Exactly. And you did a little bit of that earlier when you were talking about how life-giving silence was for you. You know, how wonderful it is to experience sunshine, to drink coffee, making associations between positive experiences and prayer is very helpful. You know, like, I always pray with my caffeine for the day.
Yes, just a little boost along the way.
And then I start to associate caffeine with prayer. And so when I drink coffee and I'm not praying, it feels weird. So anyway, so I think, though, we need to get to the third point here about
let's do that.
Focus. Otherwise, we'll run out of time.
Sure.
So like I said earlier, focus is a big deal because people are just pulled in so many different directions, and life moves at 1,000 miles an hour. Everybody struggles with this. It doesn't mean that there are no answers. It is important, though, to recognize that there are two types of distraction. There is life distraction, and there is distraction in the time that we set aside for prayer. Let me first talk about life distraction. There was some really good research done a number of years ago called the Reveal Research, and they came out with several books. And what they were trying to understand is spiritual growth. This church had hired a secular consulting company, McKinsey Management, one of the top management consulting companies, and they were looking at 5 stages, or I think they had 4 stages of spiritual growth that they discovered in their church. And then they replicated that in research in other churches. Eventually, there's another book that came out called Move, and it's what they had learned from 1,000 churches in this research. So anyway, one of the things that they found is that by looking at the variables that are associated with growth from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, they're all different. You know, except for one thing. There's one variable that's consistent across all 4 stages and transitions, and that's personal spiritual practices, prayer and scripture contemplation. Those are associated with each transition. So if there's one thing you want to focus on, you want to make sure that you focus on that.
Yeah.
But the research also shows that it changes, like we were saying a little while ago, right? Going from stage 1 to stage 2, people pray and read differently than they do 2 to 3. So, it's important to be aware of that. The second thing they found is that there are 2 other stages that are off to the side that are not linear. One of them is called the stalled stage, where people get distracted. They get distracted by life and they stop growing. And so distraction is an important thing to be very aware of, because you don't want to end up in the stalled category. You want to keep growing, right? And the stalled category is unfortunately a sizable number. And they still go to church. They still consider themselves Christians. And I'm sure they are, but they're not growing. So if we want to keep growing, it's important to recognize that distraction is a real enemy in life in general. The other thing I found in my research is that every single person that I talked to that was not praying at the moment said that they had a prayer life, and then something changed and they fell off the wagon.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And that something changed was almost predictable. They changed jobs. They moved apartments. They got married. They had a first child. They had a second child. And then it takes them a really long time to get back on the horse, to get back in the saddle. And so it's important to recognize that life is going to have changes. Your 20s are going to have more than usual. And to get back in the saddle. So now let's talk a little bit about the distractions that happen in prayer. Some are really simple. Close the door, find a quiet place, turn off your phone. I used to just put it on silent so that I don't get texts and notifications. And then I found myself still, when I thought of something to do, I'd go to my phone and I'd send a text. And pretty soon I'm sending 4 texts.
All of a sudden you're scrolling on Instagram. Yeah, exactly. And that one feels especially relevant today. I mean, we are all so easily distracted by our devices.
Yeah. And so I've found it critical to just turn it off, completely off. I mean, off, and to have a to-do list instead, a manual paper to-do list, because things will come up and it's very distracting to have things that I got to remember to do this. And then it's, knocking around your brain and distracting you. Just write it down and you'll come back to it later. So those are the basic things. And then another helpful thing is journaling. Some people find journaling very helpful because it organizes their thoughts. And there are many different ways of journaling that you can look into. But then the one thing people don't know, and that surprises them when I tell them this, is that I never hear somebody complaining about distraction that's praying a half hour or more.
Interesting.
Now, I'm not telling you go and pray a half hour more. Please watch your guilt and shame meter. Okay?
Right.
No guilt, no shame. I'm not saying, Nader is not saying go pray a half hour.
Okay.
What Nader is saying is that when you only pray 5 or 10 minutes a day, there is so much pressure not to be distracted. Because if you pray 5 minutes and you get distracted for 1 minute, that's 20% of your prayer time.
That's a huge chunk.
Yeah. Or if it's 2 minutes, that's 40%. That's almost half of your quiet time is gone. And it's so precious because you only get 5 minutes. So it's like, whoa. And so that you can imagine the pressure is so intense. So the people that complain most about distraction tend to be people who are praying in a really short amount of time and trying to get it all squeezed
Interesting.
in.
Okay.
And so one way to deal with that is to ask God, hey, God, actually, I recommend this across the board, is just ask God, Lord, what are you asking? What are you inviting me into in this season? Like you, when my kids were young, God actually told me I was being overly ambitious in prayer, and that I needed to cut down a little bit. And then, 10, 15 years later, he told me again, hey, I think you've outgrown this. I think you need to pray a little more. And so different seasons have different calling. People in ministry have a different calling for prayer than people not in ministry, et cetera. Maybe God is going to take you through a season of deeper prayer to prepare you from some difficult times ahead. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe you have a special calling to intimacy with God. And so he wants that more powerful time. I don't know what your situation is. So ask God and ask specific questions like, God, how frequently do you want me to be praying? For how long? And doing what in prayer, and then ask for the grace to get there and do it incrementally.
Yeah. And it feels like there's room for grace, even like in the midst of the moments that you do feel distracted or something, like you're in the midst of prayer and some life moment comes to mind and you feel distracted from what you were experiencing right there. And, that's a place to write something down maybe, but maybe that's also a place to invite the Lord in and say, what was it that took my mind that direction? And to even bring that thing to God. Or as I remember being taught in mindfulness practices and in listening prayer of that there are those places where you say like thoughts will enter your mind, just let them go without judgment and then keep going. And to say, okay, there are places where I can give myself grace absolutely for when these distractions step in. And to say like, okay, do I need to write that down? If not, I'm just going to let that go and I'm going to bring myself back to center and I'm going to keep going. Yeah.
Doing that is gold. And I think developing that habit would really, really bless you. I mean, people who, like I was saying, people who pray a little bit more, it's not that they don't get distracted. It's just that there's less pressure. Yeah. So if I'm praying, a little longer and I get distracted for 5 minutes, big deal. I come right back.
Exactly. Yes.
So I have a little more grace for myself.
Right. I really love that. once again, Nader, as I asked you last time, we've covered a number of things. You've given us some really nice practical tools here to start implementing like today, right now. But is there a final encouragement or a final piece of advice that you would give to alumni as they're leaning into this fundamental faith rhythm of prayer? And right along with that, do you have any other resources that you would recommend to our alumni?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if you're not looking forward to your time with God, if you're not enjoying it, and it lasts more than a week, talk to someone. Okay. Try something different. But don't give up. Please don't give up. And then as far as resources, I actually did do a sermon series on this. And it's on my website. If you go to my website is called myspiritualdirector.com. And if you go to the sermons and then scroll down to growing in prayer, there's a 3-part sermon that covers this in a little bit more depth. Great. Also, when I was writing my book on anxiety and prayer, I had started actually writing a book on prayer, and the editors were like, "Hey, wait a minute! You've got some nice insights here. We should include those in your book on anxiety and prayer." So there's a chapter in there on overcoming obstacles in prayer. So that's another option. A third set of options is my favorite books on prayer, my top 3. I love Richard Foster's book on prayer. It's just called Prayer, Finding the Heart's True Home. Phil Yancey has a poetic book that I like a lot. It's called Prayer Doesn't Make a Difference. And then if you want something a little deeper, if you want something that digs into deeper ground and goes into deeper waters, I'd recommend Thomas Green, Opening to God. Okay. And then the last thing I'll recommend is, if this is difficult for you, find a mentor, find a spiritual director, especially somebody who is not going to stir up the guilt and shame and who is going to help you get out of that guilt and shame and make it more life-giving.
Yes. Oh, Nader, thank you so much. This, I'm really grateful that we get to provide this level of practicality focused in on prayer obstacles, because I think that guilt and shame can really rear its ugly head, and we kind of want to pretend like we don't have problems with it, even though everybody struggles to do this well in one way or another, or at one time or another in their lives. And this just feels like it normalizes some of that for us, especially in seasons of transition, and it gives us some really nice tools to take with us and to start using, like I said, today, to keep developing. Man, Lord, I want to have a fruitful, meaningful, deep relationship with you, and prayer needs to be a part of it. Like, I want prayer to be a part of that. Can we work on that together, and inviting God into that space and saying, like, let's do this. This is part of our relationship together, is growing in prayer. I love the invitation to bring God into that with you, and these tools you've given to us. Nader, thank you very much, and thanks that you're going to join us one more time. We're going to talk one more time here about relationships. So thank you again for your investment in alumni. I'm really grateful for you.
It is my joy and a privilege as well. So blessings to everybody out there, and
yes,
we'll talk to you on the next podcast.
Alumni, God understands more than you realize that your life is changing and that your prayer rhythms are going to change with it. Prayer isn't a one-size-fits-all discipline. Do we all need it and benefit greatly from it? Certainly. But do we all have to do it in the same way? Certainly not. Take the time to test different rhythms and practices, and don't feel like you have to operate under the "if it isn't painful, then it must not be good for me" mentality. Spending time with God in prayer isn't eating your vegetables. It's feasting on the bread of life, and you're not counting carbs. So give yourself the grace and the space to test out different approaches and bring God in on the conversation. He wants to walk through this with you, and actually sorting out these prayer rhythms can be just as relationship building with God as finding the rhythm that suits you best. Just don't stop trying. Come back next week as we discuss relationships and the spiritual rhythms of finding community after graduation. Until then, consider sharing this episode with someone who needs to hear it, and I will see you in the after, alumni. Thanks for listening to After 4. This podcast is brought to you by the InterVarsity Alumni Relations Team, hosted and produced by John Steele, production assistance by Mike Zentera, edited by Caleb Leppert, and our After 4 theme music was written and performed by John Steele.